A very good morning, Mr. Shanmuga, and I am Krishna Nagendra. Today, I will be presenting the introduction to our topic, which is hazard in manufacturing factories. In today's competitive and fast paced business environment, ethics and integrity are more important than ever. Companies are not only judged based on their profits, but also on how they conduct their operations. So this is our teammates, and I am Krishna Nagendra. We have Afzan, Ashraf, Shazwan, and Muhammad Saifuddin. In this presentation, we will discuss the key concept of ethics and integrity and explore common issues faced in the workplace. For this part, I will introduce the core problem, which is the chemical hazard in manufacturing industry. Firstly, workers in manufacturing environments face daily exposure risks. They are constantly exposed to toxic chemicals, solvents, gases, and dangerous fumes during production. This makes their working environment highly hazardous. As a result, this leads to severe health impacts. Workers may experience respiratory diseases, skin irritations, chronic conditions, fatigue, and even persistent headaches. This brings us to the ethical tension in this issue. While companies aim to maximize output and efficiency, they also have a moral responsibility to protect their employees. Lastly, in terms of regulatory context, these issues are governed by the Department of Occupational Safety and Health, or DOSH in Malaysia. Overall, this highlights the impact of balancing productivity with ethical responsibility in protecting workers.
Good day, my name is Muhammad Saifuddin Amru. So, today I'm going to present about the finding and discussion from the survey. So, let's take a look at the data from our survey of 50 workers. The number is usually excellent, which is 98.1% workers understand the risk. 90.4% have received proper training and 94.2% report have sufficient PPE. Most notably, management received a 100% score for prioritizing safety and maintaining transparency on the workplace. On paper, it is a nearly perfect ethical environment. However, we found a critical transparency paradox. Despite this high score, 56.8% of workers still suffer from health complications. This brings us to health complication paradox. We observe persistent issues like respiratory disease and chronic fatigue. The cost analysis shows that knowing the risk is not the same as eliminating it. While transparency is high, standard PPE is often insufficient against highly toxic modern chemicals. Furthermore, we identify engineering gaps where facility lacks advanced ventilation and constant tension where productivity pressures can slowly erode strict adherence to safety protocol over time. So to evaluate this, we use three ethical lenses from utilitarianism perspective, protecting workers ensure long-term human capital sustainability. So under deontology, compliance with safety regulation is non-negotiable moral duty, not just a cost calculation. And finally, virtue ethics remind us that ethical leadership must drive a culture where workers feel safe to report hazard without fear. If we do nothing, we face a normalization of defiance and eventual moral failure. As our study concludes, transparency alone is not enough, but action is a moral obligation. That's all.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Shazwan Hilman bin Samsul and I'll be presenting my slide which is solutions from gear to engineering. Okay, for my first point is automated chemical handling. What we want is that we want to utilize the use of automated machines such as robots and all this stuff to make sure that our staff that are humans are not exposed to these very harmful chemicals, and in which where these robots, when they're exposed to these chemicals, they don't really have the same risk and also long-term side effects that us humans do. So that's why we want to use automated machinery in chemical handling. Next is advanced ventilation system. What we want is to install local exhaustion ventilation such as LEV, okay, which is a industrial air filtration unit that removes all the chemicals, fumes in the air, especially from things like most commonly, which is carbon monoxide that can lead to cancer, especially the cancer of our lung itself, which nobody wants. Next is regular equipment maintenance. What we want is to establish a very, very strict and rigid routine so that we check the machinery that we use, the electronics, the electrical, all this stuff. We want to make sure that it's in a very, very good condition so that anything that we use is fully optimized for the situation itself. Okay, for example, when we have the local exhaust ventilation (LEV), let's say that we don't maintain it, and then someday it just breaks down, right? It's going to lead to those chemical particles all over, especially carbon monoxide, going into our lungs. And when we intake a lot of it into our lungs, that is not something that we want because, like, okay, a very, very like a light matter. Okay, I won't say light, but more of a common thing is that we would have respiratory issues. Respiratory issues that can lead to anything from that. No, that can very, very negatively affect those, especially with like asthma and all this stuff. That's not what we want. Okay, from the fourth point is mandatory medical checkup. We want to make sure that our staff are properly, are properly well, and also they are routinely routinely checked up so that nothing can risk them. And let's say they are not fit for the job itself. Okay, we can make sure that we have the diagnosis and maybe the medical supplements that they need, all this stuff, medication, anything that's going to help us lower the risk of any fatalities, any bad stuff happening to our workers itself. Okay, and finally, using high quality PPE. Okay, what we want is to, as a company, we want to provide those high quality PPEs for free, especially for the staff and all the stuff. We want to make sure that we give them as much as possible equipments that's needed so that they are not exposed to any harmful chemicals and lowers the risk of anything bad happening to any of us. Alright, for my next slide is solutions, culture, training, and regulations. On the left side of the slide, we can see culture and leadership. Okay, so my first point is ethical leadership. What we want is someone who leads the team itself, not just prioritizing profit for the company, but instead prioritizing the safety of our workers. That is what we want. Yes, I do agree that profit is very important to run a business, but you must remember the foundation, those who are supporting the business itself, is the workers. So what we want is to foster a mindset of safety first from top to down, especially for those who are involved in the chemical sector itself. Next is regular safety workshop. This is a form of awareness to those who are working and involved in this industry. What we want to make sure is that the staff knows the risk, the potential, the cases, the examples of like past experiences of any workers who've seen maybe their colleagues, all this stuff have endured very, very severe pain, very, very bad accidents, which we want to prevent in the future. And for my final point for the culture and leadership is visual reinforcement. This is also similar to the second point, but this is more of a passive way to 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 make sure that others are aware of their surroundings, of the safety, of the risk, and the potential that could happen to any of them. Okay, what we can do is we deploy posters, digital signage, and hazard signs anywhere that we can. Like for example, you can see, like in construction sites, you can see a very, very big green sign. Usually, they say safety first. That maybe has like very, very no, that maybe looks simple, but I think that means a lot because When you look at it, it makes sure that anyone who's going in, especially when you put it at the entrance itself, gonna make sure that everyone is aware of the risk and make sure that they are just safely um, wearing the PPEs, wearing any of the safety equipments that they need. Okay, moving on to the right side of the slide is policy and regulation. Stronger DOSH enforcement is my first point, which is the government agency that is responsible for the health, safety, and welfare of the workers itself. This is very important because why? They are the government body that checks regularly these industrial facilities to make sure that they are up to standard, up to procedure, all this stuff. They are not breaking any type of laws that could risk anyone in the place itself. My next point is transparent reporting. This is also very crucial because this ensures that we know what we're going to face. We know that any of the previous cases that's happened, previous accident, make sure that they are not covered up. When we want to make sure that they are known to others as a sign of experience and a sign of things to be very about. We don't want to hide this. We don't want to like put it behind something. We don't want to seal it up because sometimes when we are not aware of something, we don't know the potential, the risk that could happen to us. Finally, is research on substitutes. Okay, of course, our company have profits, and we can use some of that money and allocate it to invest in R&D so that we can explore any other chemical alternative that can be used that are less toxic, less corrosive on all this stuff that could be very beneficial for the safety of our workers itself.
As we move toward the conclusion of our presentation, I want to bring everything back to the human element. We've looked at the data and the technical challenges, but now we must look at ethics in action. It is one thing to have safety policies on paper, but it is another to see them live out on the floor. Our findings have led us to three critical pillars that define the future of our workplace safety. First, let's address the safety paradox. During our observation, we found something quite striking. A high ethical culture existing alongside a high illness rate of 56.8%. At first glance, this seems like a contradiction. However, what it actually reveals that while our team is honest and feels safe enough to report their health issues, which is a win for transparency, honesty alone is not a shield. Trust is the foundation for reporting, but it cannot physically prevent toxicity. We must bridge the gap between knowing there is a problem and stopping it from happening. This leads us to our second point, which is beyond transparency. In many industries, there is a heavy reliance on PPE, the mask, the gloves, and the personal gear. But true responsibility requires us to move from these passive measures to active engineering controls. The key takeaway here is simple but profound. Knowing the risk is not the same as eliminating the risk. As engineers and professionals, our duty is to design systems that protect people automatically rather than putting the entire burden of safety on the individual worker. Finally, we look at sustainable strategy. We often hear that safety is a cost, but we argue that it is a smart business investment. By protecting our human capital, we ensure long-term sustainability and a loyal, productive workforce. To leave you with a final thought, safety is not just a legal requirement, it is an ethical imperative. It is our moral duty to ensure that every person who comes to work returns home in the same health they arrive in. Thank